Cinnamon's Wild and Wonderful Christmas, a not-so-tall goat tale. Cinnamon is a very friendly brown and white goat with little ears and big eyes. One night she saw the brightest star she had ever seen. Goats by nature are curious creatures, and Cinnamon is the most curious of all. She decided to investigate. She followed the star as it moved from over her home at Blueberry Goat Haven all the way to the center square in the little town of Bluefield, Virginia. Lo and behold, the star came to a stop right above a beautiful little baby lying in a manger. Cinnamon was struck with wonder. A rather large billy goat standing nearby said, "My friends told me the baby's name is Jesus, which means he will save his people from their sins." Cinnamon knew only God could do that, but couldn't quite connect why this baby had that name. Still, this was very good news that someone could save her from her sins, because she'd bitten the ears of the other goats she didn't like and many times disrupted the peace of the herd. Then Cinnamon saw Mr. Sheep, an old kind friend who had given his wool to people for many years. Mr. Sheep told Cinnamon that the baby on Mary's lap was called Lamb of God. Mr. Sheep admitted this concerned him because he knew the firstborn lambs had to give up their lives in the spring of every year. But this baby Jesus looked so perfect that Mr. Sheep didn't want anything bad to happen to him. Cinnamon walked over to the baby Jesus' mother, Mary, and offered goat milk. Cinnamon loved sharing her milk, and she knew what it was like to have a newborn. Mary's husband Joseph was so thankful, but Cinnamon saw a little sadness in his eyes. "Are you sad?" she asked. Joseph nodded and said this baby is destined to grow up to be a shepherd. "Why does that make you sad?" asked Cinnamon. Joseph told her a good shepherd often has to pay a very high price to protect his sheep, sometimes even laying down his own life for them. Cinnamon was hearing many things on this holy night that she did not understand. Mr. Sheep had called the baby a lamb, but Joseph called the baby a shepherd. Cinnamon dearly hoped that what Joseph said about the shepherd would never come to pass. And to make it so, she wanted to go home and tell all the sheep and goats that from this day forward they must never go astray. They must never envy Mr. Rose's greener grass, or wander into the woods, or eat poisonous rhododendron. They must stop butting heads over who was in charge. But Cinnamon knew goats very well. How could she ever expect such a thing? Even when they had been given the best goat haven in the world, the herd fought continually. They took for granted their warm shelter, their spring water, their lush pastures, and the master who kept it all in order. When they felt guilty, they tried to make up for their bad behavior with good behavior, like making goat soap and goat cheese and fertilizing the grass. But they always fell back into stealing and teat pulling and lots of lying. Just thinking about it, Cinnamon felt ashamed and wondered if it was even possible for a bad goat to be good. She put her head down in the straw in front of the manger. She didn't feel any hope at all. Just then, Melchior, a very dark-skinned man from Africa, walked toward the child and set down a gift of costly frankincense oil. It showed Cinnamon that good kings save their best gifts for the weak and helpless ones in this world. Cinnamon immediately loved this wise man with his kind face. Melchior clasped his hands to his heart as he looked at the child. Cinnamon, have hope. This little child is the gift promised by the great Lord and Creator, and is given to weak and helpless goats like you, and even to kings like me. For I cannot save my soul, even with all the power and riches in the world. Like you, I need someone perfect to take my place. Cinnamon wondered what Melchior meant by take my place, but she kept that question to herself. And then, at just that moment, the door swung open at the First United Methodist Church across the street, and Cinnamon heard an organ playing and a choir singing. They were singing a Christmas carol, O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel. Those words rang a bell in Cinnamon's mind. She had a friend named Manny, so she knew Emmanuel meant God with us. And ransom, that word meant the price someone has to pay to get you out of deep trouble, like when you've been kidnapped along the road, or captured by a wild animal, or have fallen into the hands of cruel men. Did this mean that the ransom price for freeing her from her troubles would be paid by God Himself, taking the form of this little baby? Melchior was listening intently too. He told Cinnamon of an old prophecy he knew. It said a baby would grow up, feel all the joys and pains we do, and yet do nothing wrong, but only good. Melchior said this Jesus would then ransom his perfect life to pay the judgment cost for all our crimes, big and small. That prophecy was called the Great Exchange, he said. Cinnamon had never heard of such a prophecy, or of any such story so full of so much sadness, sacrifice, joy, and so much comfort. She somehow knew it must be true, because every spring she saw how life came out of death. The old bean seed that had been thrown out and left to rot on the ground, in the spring, Cinnamon saw it suddenly shoot forth a green sprout. She so wanted to be free of dead things in her life. She just never imagined what it would cost. For the first time, she understood that this little baby would use his freedom to set her free. Cinnamon was used to stories that were bad news or good news, but this was a bad news and good news story. At the cost of this perfect child, God would ransom her, the goat who had never been able to change herself or her self-centered heart. What comfort and hope to think someone would save her from herself. She finally understood it wasn't strength the King of creation was seeking, it was weakness. All the strengths she thought she possessed, all of her pride and self-sufficiency, She now counted them as loss for the goal of knowing this child who was yet a king. With that message, she was filled with joy and galloped back to the goat haven to go bad on the mountain that Jesus Christ is born. After a day of wonderment and joy, Cinnamon was exhausted. She took her time walking home, pondering all she had seen and heard. But there was a deep peace in her heart. It was very dark along the road, but when she turned the corner into her home at Blueberry Goat Haven, she looked up and saw that the hillside was full of beautiful lights. She remembered that Mr. Rose put up lights every year in memory of his dear wife, Honey, and the lights were also for the loved ones of his friends and neighbors who had also passed away. But this year was special because Mr. Rose had put up lights on her side of the fence. There in the field, shining in the dark night sky, were the most beautiful words Cinnamon had ever seen: peace on earth. Cinnamon found a warm spot in the cold barn, folded her head onto her chest, and dreamed of the time there would be peace on earth for all of the goats and all of mankind.